Raise your hand if you get most or all of your news from just a few mainstream American media sources. Now raise your hand if you think you're pretty well informed about the world. I'm sorry to everyone who raised their hand for both of those. You're a liar. I don't make the rules. It's still mutually exclusive. American journalism has an issue. And don't worry, it's not fake news. But so 2018. The issue is money. All of America's major news providers are private firms. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's the way it's always been, and it's probably the only way to guarantee a free press. Until relatively recently, this worked pretty well too. There were some publications who were known for producing low-quality news, but the vast majority of Americans knew which ones they were and not to trust them. And there were just as many good publications interested in providing accurate and well-written news to the public, because economically it made the most sense. As long as you were one of these publications, and you continued to provide well-written, factually correct news, there would be a market and enough money for you. Then something changed though. The rise of the internet meant the decline of traditional news media. A lot of local newspapers closed, and just as many saw a huge decline in the quality of news that they could provide. And this happened to national papers too. Just about any major one you can think of went through pretty major upheavals. And so suddenly there was an issue. More than ever, traditional news providers needed to generate a profit to survive, but they couldn't rely on the value of their product alone to get it. So they had to go and start seeking a profit, and their focus had to shift. Instead of being news providers who could also generate a profit, they had to become profit generators who also did some reporting, like a side hustle. Now there are grave problems when money becomes the means, method, and objective in journalism. One of the worst of these is that whoever has the most money and is most willing to spend it can gain an outsized and massive influence. Take Jeff Bezos. He purchased the Washington Post in 2013 for $250 million US. Now think about that. Jeff Bezos, who's already the wealthiest man in the world, which means he's incredibly powerful, can use the widely respected Washington Post as his own personal mouthpiece. He can pull negative stories about himself. He can give himself positive coverage when he wants it. And worst of all, he can imbue his own positions into the paper. The Washington Post no longer has a left or a right bias, but a Bezos bias. And you could argue he hasn't done any of that, and that might be true. But there's nothing stopping him from directly influencing the views and controlling awareness of critical issues for millions of Americans. If you need an example of what could happen, don't worry, there is one, and it's on a much larger scale. Let me introduce you to the Sinclair TV broadcast group. So Sinclair is the largest media and news provider in the United States. And don't worry if you haven't heard of them. It's how they like it. Sinclair owns about 193 TV stations across around 100 markets. If I want to simplify that, that means about 40% of American homes get their programming, and they're the single largest owner of ABC and Fox News affiliated local TV stations. Now, one company owning this many TV news stations isn't inherently an issue. What they do with them, though, is extremely worrying. Whenever they purchase a TV station, they keep the sale as low-key as possible. So they don't want the audience picking up on any major changes. So there's no changes to marketing, or branding, or anchors. And they're really good at this. Usually audiences have no idea a sale occurred, let alone who the new owner is. And this puts Sinclair and their owners, the Smith family, in a place of trust with an audience who assumes their news is coming from the same source it always has been. And for many Americans, they're reliant upon these stations and upon this trust, as they're the only source of news that they receive, or the primary source of news. But Sinclair abuses this relationship. Whenever they purchase a TV station, they begin to shift the programming to an extremely right-wing biased lens. And segments which are pre-written and then approved by the Smith family begin to run. This allows the ultra-wealthy Smith family to curate the flow of information to millions of Americans in support of their own agendas, biases, and beliefs. And the threat this poses to democracy is huge. As former Vice President Hubert Humphrey once wrote, democracy is hammered out on the anvil of discussion, debate, and dissent. It's important to note, though, that discussion and debate are only meaningful if those arguing are well-informed. Sinclair and others mislead the American public, breeding ignorance and making constructive discourse fruitless and impossible. Sinclair and Jeff Bezos aren't the cause of the issue. As I said earlier, that's the need for profit. If a news provider is to survive in the current market, they need to generate a higher profit. That's pretty simple. What becomes complicated and is often quite problematic is how they can go about increasing profits. One way is through sensationalism. So defined by Oxford Dictionary as the use of shocking or exciting language or stories at the expense of accuracy in order to provoke public interest or excitement. Sensationalism can, in effect, be an attempt to sell the audience a story instead of providing them with actual information. Now, I bet when I'm talking about this, what you're imagining is the Daily Mail or the Washington Post or any of those running a scandalous headline about Kim Kardashian or the royal family, something along those lines. But major news corporations are just as guilty. Take a look at this recent CNN article. First, Alan Dershowitz says you can't be impeached without committing a crime. Now he says you can. For those of you who don't know, Alan Dershowitz is a widely respected legal professor from Harvard University who was hired by the Trump administration as counsel for constitutional law during the impeachment. Now, the article's central premise is that Dershowitz, prior to being hired by Trump, asserted in reference to impeachment, you don't need a technical crime. The article claims he then reversed this opinion, using an excerpt of a quote in which he explains his defense of the president would hinge on the need for criminal-like conduct to occur. But they buried Dershowitz's full quote at the end of the article, in which he explains that you need criminal-type behavior, akin to treason and bribery. It doesn't have to be a technical crime, because at the time the framers wrote the Constitution, there was no criminal code. So if that sounds similar, or exactly like his original position, that's because it was. Even if he worded it slightly differently, it's far from the full 180-degree turn CNN is claiming occurred. And this is a textbook example of sensationalism. The article's authors used an inflammatory headline and repeated its language in an effort to sell the audience a story rather than to provide them with actual information. Now, why is this an issue? Imagine, for a second, that you see this headline pop up on your phone, or you're skimming a newspaper, and you see it, but you don't actually read the article. So you never see the full quote, or Dershowitz's explanation, or what's really true. Instead, what you're left with is a catchy headline, which feeds into your pre-existing beliefs and allows you to feel informed, while in reality remaining oblivious. So in effect, CNN, rather than providing the public with information so that they can better participate in the political process, is attempting to generate clicks and revenue by selling a story. And this comes at the cost of a healthy democracy. The other primary way that news agencies can increase their profits is by curating their content for one specific audience. Put simply, there's more money to be made in creating content which appeals to a core audience's beliefs or ideology than there is in making content for everyone. Now, curation of information, subtle bias in vocabulary, and confrontationalism are all the major ways this tactic can manifest itself. And they all pose their own unique challenges. But let's start with curation. It's the simplest. And effectively, whenever an event occurs which contradicts a news provider's core audience's beliefs, challenges them, reflects them in a bad light, or simply wouldn't be interesting to that core audience, the news agency can simply choose to not discuss it. Or if it's a recent development and an ongoing event, they can shelve the ongoing event until a more favorable development occurs, so like putting a kid in timeout. The issues with this are pretty glaring. First, in general, Americans are just less well informed. But more importantly, it divides and segments American society based off of which news station you use. A viewer in Los Angeles who watches NBC will get vastly different opinions and events than someone who watches a Fox news station in Yuma, Arizona, just 4 hours away. And a lot of the polarization that we see in society can be directly attributed to this. This informational isolation leads to a decay in national discourse, as those debating are no longer even discussing the same events. Similar to this is the use of subtly biased vocabulary. Words hold a tremendous impact in how we formulate opinions, and those used by news stations are often deliberately chosen to advance an agenda or appeal to their audience. Take, for example, how conflict is reported on in the US. Most, if not all, major news providers will use complimentary or legitimizing language when describing parties, states, or actors that they support, whilst doing the opposite for parties, states, and actors they do not support. Note the difference between hearing a country's government confirm something versus hearing a country's government claim something. This goes further though. The very nature of groups can be called into question by the title given to them. Think about which title would make you more sympathetic for a group: freedom fighters and rebels, or extremists and terrorists. Depending on which news station you use, a group could be any or all four of these at the same time. Finally, confrontationalism, effectively a synthesis of the previous two, is when news providers attempt to establish an us versus them narrative. And it explains a lot of the issues we see in society today. A prime way to observe it is in how CNN, Fox, and others cover the American political climate, similar to how they would sports. The emphasis is on who will win, how each party can beat the other, and who can generate the most points, political points, rather than the focus being on actual solutions and issues. So as news agencies divide America along these political lines, political beliefs can begin to feel like a personal identity. And when they are criticized, it begins to feel like a personal attack. This turns debate into a winner-take-all argument, where there's no room for concession. And if all you care about is winning, then compromise, the founding basis of our democracy, becomes seen as losing.